Well, I should just say as a personal note, I've been involved with the Innovators Workbench from the very beginning, and I don't exaggerate when I say it's been really the most meaningful experience of my career. I suspect more people know me from the Innovators Workbench and the Stanford program than from the writing I do, but I've gotten over that a long time ago, and I'm perfectly fine with it. And to a certain degree, I've been campaigning for a lot of years to do something like that. Something like this. So what we're going to do is we're going to break today's discussion into three parts, but hopefully they'll not be three discrete parts, but will reflect on each other, because I think to a certain degree the biodesign program has always been a program that's rooted a bit in the past, certainly present in the future. Here's Casey McGlynn walking in the back door. Casey. Great thanks for everything that Casey's done for this program, and also then look to the future. So we're going to begin with Paul and Josh talking a little bit, then we'll go to Lyn and Todd talking about the present, and we'll finish with Uday and Tom looking at some future initiatives about the program. So Paul and Josh, let me begin with you by asking you if you can just give us a little bit of sense of, prior to the founding of the program itself, what you were trying to do conceptually, where the idea came from. I know, Josh, that you had done something similar, at least in an indirect way, when you were at Pfizer. Give us a little sense of how the thinking behind what eventually led to the biodesign program.
Well, I guess I'll start out because I'm the old one here. So, so on a personal note, I had the amazing good luck to be mentored by Tom Fogarty and John Simpson. Right? I mean, I just fell into that haphazardly. It seemed to me that was just such a terrific experience that somehow something should be created along those lines. And so came back to Stanford from a place up north in San Francisco that shouldn't be named. And we started out by creating something called the Medical Device Network. That was, Steve Osterly and Mike Dake and some people who you know. Then we really wanted to do something serious about training. And Josh and I had breakfast at Il Fornau. I had no idea about your background with Fresh Tech, but I think that's a good segue to you.
Sure. Yeah.
Was Fresh Tech the Pfizer program?
That was the Pfizer program. So, back when I was leaving medical school and I was an engineer and looking for a job, I was very fortunate to have my resume picked out of the stack by the CFO of Pfizer, who was Hank McKinnell, and he brought me in and he basically created a job for me. And one of his primary assignments to me was to try to figure out why is it that they keep on acquiring these great companies and then they stop innovating. And the question was, how do we actually innovate here at Pfizer? How do we keep that innovation going? And so I sort of set about the task of understanding the history of all these founders and understanding the processes that they went through and what were the similarities. I tried to read as much as I could about innovation, et cetera. And in the process, what I realized is what all of the innovations that were now at part of a $2 billion Pfizer medical device business, they all started with fundamentally a patient need and someone who perceived that need independent of a technology in mind. And they actually built the technology to meet the need rather than the other way around. And these became really big, successful businesses. And so when I looked at what was actually going on in the businesses, because one of my roles in this position was also to be a part of this R&D review process. Everything was iterative. It was just the same technology iterating. And so the observation was they weren't going back to fundamental principles and looking at needs, and therefore, if they only did that, perhaps they could guide themselves forward. And so, over the course of many years, back then we started this program that we called Fresh Tech, which is a PF for fresh, since it was PF for Pfizer. And back then they did have a device division. Long after that they jettisoned it, and then they considered buying Allergan to get back into it again, but that's sort of off the topic. But anyway, they they were, so over many years, we actually sort of perfected this process, and it actually became sort of the foundation of my own career as an entrepreneur. And when I left Pfizer, started ExploraMed, and we started using these tools to create companies.
So let me ask a question. So then you guys got together, you had breakfast, and the idea was, how can we launch this program, which is kind of a mentoring program? Why do it within academia? Why do it at Stanford?
Yeah.
Was there ever temptation to create a kind of separate quasi-industrial, but not necessarily rooted in academic? What was the benefit or the rationale behind doing it within an academic center?
Well, I think Paul identified that we were sitting here in the middle of the most vibrant medical device network in the world, really. And Stanford's right in the middle, yet not capitalizing on it, not training, not taking advantage of it. What can we do to sort of create a sort of a center point, a strike point for all that activity? And it was sort of like, his peanut butter and my chocolate, sort of was like, wait, maybe this can be a training program in innovation, and maybe we can put the two together.
So what was the first class like? What were you trying to accomplish, and what were the early days of the program like? And who were the first? Yeah. I know Amir Belson was one of the first fellows. Mm-hmm. Who else was in that program, and what were they doing specifically
that's a memory test, but Asha Nayak was in the first group, who's now the CMO at Intel, Chief Medical Officer. Chris Eversole was in that group.
Nick Morlis,
who went on
serial entrepreneur,
company out of Biodesign, Acumen. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mentioned Chris Eversole, who helped with that, who's now running a medtech incubator prototyping shop called OST.
So before we get to what the experience for those folks were like, what were the criteria that you were using to select fellows? And was there a great demand for this, or a great interest, or did people kind of not get what you were doing and didn't know why they needed to be in something like the biodesign program?
So the main criterion was somebody who was willing to take a flyer on doing this. No, we were, back then and as now too, we were looking for people who seriously wanted to be leaders in medtech innovation, and we're looking for a training process and a pathway for doing that.
Right.
Great. So what was the reaction within the academic community? You once told me, Paul, that there was some skepticism among the academics. Here you were, doing something very closely to an entrepreneurial spirit. Right. What were those first years like in terms of reception in the academic community?
Yeah, so that's absolutely right. There was pretty deep suspicion of what we were doing, and we still encounter that, right? People, we don't take any financial interest. The program doesn't take financial interest in what comes out, and the world's environment has changed a lot, so that now entrepreneurship at universities is kind of an okay thing to do, but 15 years ago it was not.
Yeah, there was a lot of skepticism. I mean, especially that we were doing something medical, and the idea of juxtaposing sort of a business or company creation idea next to that was very controversial, and we created, sort of based on the J&J model, sort of our own credo of sort of what is the ethical principles that we're going to use to sort of define this juxtaposition of business and patient care, and fundamentally underlining that if you really want to change the world and do something that's going to have vast potential, it actually also has to be a great business at the same time. And that, I think at the time, at least in academia, was sort of a very foreign and a shunned concept, because it was felt that those couldn't be together because there was an absolute conflict of interest. And I think we really were leaders in trying to put those together and say, actually, they have to be together. Otherwise, the therapies that get developed will never get to touch so many lives.
And in fairness, I have to say quickly, having said all of that, Stanford is probably the only place that would have tolerated it and wound up nurturing it, so we were in the right spot.
Was there any temptation just to turn you over to the tech transfer office and make you a part of the tech transfer office?
Not especially because we were on the educational side, and tech transfer office is more transactional, so we were okay there.
So the reason I ask that is because were the goals from the very beginning to launch companies? You were really engaging in a process of thinking about what innovation is and how you get innovation, how you bring it forth. Was the goal always to have fellows turn out companies?
Always training. That is the goal. Still is the goal.
That's right.
The companies are a byproduct.
So someone can come through this. So from the very beginning, someone can come through the program, not start a company, and to your mind, be successful.
Oh,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We want them to fail as much as possible here, so that they can go out in the real world and actually get it right.
No, we have people in big companies. We have 9 of our alums are on faculty here in medicine and engineering, academic inventors, and lots of places around the country. So
at some point, biodesign began to expand beyond just the confines of Stanford and began to be be embraced by the larger medical community here. How did this go from being a purely academic program, a classroom setting, if it ever was just that, to one embraced by and part of the medical community here? And to what extent do you think biodesign has helped shape the culture and the community in this area?
I mean, I'll say that we started off with the idea that, Paul and I are not the experts, and the experts are all sitting in these seats here. And so we realized that to do it right was to draw from the community and actually make biodesign about the community, taught by the community. And so, biodesign has benefited greatly from the riches of all of these talented people who are experts in their various fields, who bring all these relevant experiences, and to this day participate very actively in training. And we're sort of just creating the framework to allow that to all happen. But there isn't sort of a central thought. It's actually all of the combined community thought. So it actually began as a community effort.
So at what point did the large medical device companies begin to take notice, begin to embrace the program? I know when I've spoken to lots of CEOs, not just in the context of the Innovators Workbench program, but just in my conversations with them out, and I've noticed over the course of the years that just a significant ramp up in awareness about and eagerness on their part to come out here and to talk with fellows. At what point did that begin to gel for you guys?
So from the beginning, so we had strategics who invested in the idea from the start, so the first year of the program, officially we had funding from a couple of strategics.
Yeah.
Great. And what about the investor community out here?
Same story. Right away, good interest, good support from a number of venture groups.
Yeah.
And do you think your interest and their interests were aligned? I mean, were they looking for the same thing from the programs that you were?
Absolutely. They were looking for the talent that was being created. They were looking for the ideas, the companies, we had the venture capitalists sit on the panels at the end of class. We had them come and interact with the students. It was great.
So the device startups industry has faced a lot of challenges over the years. Has the approach or the intention or the goal, fundamental principles of the program changed at all over the course of the last 15 years? Are you still trying to accomplish the same things that you did? You talked about needs identification being a big part from the very beginning, but is there anything about the program that has evolved beyond the original vision?
I mean, from my perspective, the process is timeless. To focus on needs as a primary basis of creating innovative solutions is a fundamental. What's changed is the selection criteria, the constraints that the ideas need to navigate to be successful, and that's a constantly changing thing, and that relates to the environment. But fundamentally,
you mean what kinds of technologies you want to bring
well,
forward?
right, or how much money is available, and to what extent you can take on projects that have what degree of risk, be successful. So I think that's changed dramatically. But the fundamental idea that one should start a process by really focusing on the patient and understand what they're going through and the caregiver experience and try to figure out how that's working and not working as a fundamental basis of starting everything is still, I think, true and will be forever.
If I can just add 2 things quickly to that. I agree completely with what you said, but also the needs finding is different, right? So we're looking more into economic needs finding, right? Is there an opportunity to take cost out of the system? And we're looking outside of the hospital, right? So we're trying to get to earlier maintenance of health rather than in the intensive care unit only.
So-
Sounds like we're stealing your thunder.
Exactly.
Well,
We're taking all of our good lines.
Oh
We're gonna
man!
have nothing to talk about.
you have slides, so that's okay. That's pretty. So, as you've done this, and as you moved through those early years, to what extent were you trying to find the kind of fundamental basic principles that would apply in every situation relative to the development of innovative technology? And to what extent were you specifically trying to give would-be entrepreneurs a roadmap to deal with current conditions? As you think about what's changed, I mean, this program started, at a time, 2000, 2001, when it was very, very difficult for startups to get capital. Went through a period, 2004 to 2008, when it was very easy. We went back into a period when it's difficult. We've had reimbursement challenges, regulatory challenges. Are there fundamental principles of innovation that this program fosters, or is it always a matter of adapting to the current environment? Besides you could look at something like needs identification as both a fundamentally changing thing and also as a fundamental principle that applies at all times.
Well, I think we've said that it is a fundamental principle, right? And that's the most important thing, right? That framework, that way of thinking, and to have the discipline of taking time up front before jumping on a technology to really characterize the need, that's incredibly robust. Mm-hmm. And that's been it's a luxury for us, right? To be able to still function in the environment because that's so robust.
Absolutely. We're giving fellows and students an opportunity to understand the process on how to create de novo, on how to see things that aren't there, on how to solve problems that have never been solved. And that's going to be a durable value set forever.
So we're going to turn in just a second to talk about the current state of the program with Todd and Lyn, but as you think about what you wanted to accomplish at the very beginning and think about where the program is today, were there any major readjustments, recalibrations, detours, or is the program as it is behaving today very similar to what you had envisioned when you started this program?
I would say the outcomes in terms of the careers of the fellows, and we'll hear about that in just a second, has if anything, exceeded our expectations. We've expanded in some ways you'll hear about too. So we do a number of classes, graduate student, undergraduate classes. So we're a lot bigger than we were when we started, and some global programs too that we'll hear about. But fundamentally, it is remarkable how well I think the program has done in training. And then lots of other universities around the world are picking this up. So that's been fun.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, one of the most interesting things is the influence this program has had beyond this geography. And we'll get to that a little bit later. So let me, if I can, turn to Todd and Lyn right now. So to set the stage for this discussion, some statistics. There have been 168 fellows have gone through the program, and maybe you can just name them all as we take some time. And more than 1,000 grad students have taken courses in medtech development. Todd, let's begin with you. Can you give us some sense of who the fellows are who are in the program now or entered in the last year or so? Do they have a different profile than those who were in the program during its early days, given the maturation of the program and the way it's taken hold in this community?
So Todd, we should say, is the fellowship director who runs this whole thing, right? So he's got huge responsibility for the fellows.
So
Good.
with that, no pressure.
Yeah. Okay, you don't have to name all 168.
168. So, well, first, I echo what Josh said, which is that the fundamental process that we're teaching has not changed. It was the same when it came out of what Josh constructed, and so I was a fellow. I was a fellow in the fourth year of the fellowship, and it's the same then as it is today. I think the components of it have changed, and I think we're learning how to teach it a lot differently than we did and apply it differently, but the fundamentals are the same. I think the type of people that we're applying has changed, and the type of people we're taking into the fellowship has changed.
In what way?
Well, I think we originally were, 15 years ago when Josh was a fellowship director and I got the opportunity to try and keep up with what Josh had started. We were looking for a traditional med tech person that was building surgical tools, some disposables, and maybe a few implantables. This idea of health tech and wireless and mobile, we didn't have the iPhone. We didn't have any of those things that we have today. Things have evolved a ton. And so the platforms of technology have changed, but again, the fundamentals are the same. So now we're looking at people who are in computer science, in a lot more double E. We're looking at people who are more strategic. We're looking at people who are, attorneys that are coming back that have IP experience, where before we were primarily looking at clinicians and pure engineers. We take a lot more operators now, a lot more people with business experience. And I would say that, and I say this when I talk to a lot of the candidates on the phone, which is the people we took, 10 years ago, 11 years for me, from the people we take today, are very different in the sense that the competition's gotten even more fierce to get a spot in the fellowship. I don't think Uday and I would, maybe he thinks he would have got a spot. I don't think I would have got a spot.
So just speaking to that, how many people apply and how many do you accept, and what's that process like?
So we've also changed in a sense we're global. In a sense we're taking now, it's a huge international search of people that we look for. So we're no longer just looking and putting up posters at Stanford and saying, let's take a couple of doctors and some engineers. Now the word of mouth, the centers that have developed internationally are all pumping people to, I'd like to go to Stanford to train. So we have a much bigger pool of people than we had before. And as a result, the competition. So we roughly take 150 people of, we have a website and we have a admissions committee, much like any structured program does when they're taking into a fellowship program. We have the usual 400 people that start the application and they get working their way through and realize page 2, page 3, there's an interview, there's a video. So we end up getting about 150 people that finish, but then we spend a huge amount of time going through those people, and it's not an easy process.
And again, you've listed some of the new areas of interest or expertise these people have, but have the criteria changed in any other ways? Are you looking for more seasoned people? Can I come right out of graduate school and do this? Do I need to spend some time in industry or some other area of expertise?
So I think that has changed a lot. And I think the model for teaching has changed in the sense that there was a lot more people straight out of grad school. I mean, Asha was we were residents together, so she was straight out of residency in the first year. Now, I think the model is people are going to get more experience. They're going and getting, they're going to business school, or they're getting some experience before they're becoming an operator or working as a clinician for a year or two, at least doing most of a residency. And because of that, they're getting the opportunity to see healthcare in a different way than they would have just like, this is the way medtech is, or this is the way healthcare is. It's more an application of new concepts of, you've done it before, what were the things you struggled with? Let's talk about some other strategies and ways to take that on. So I think we're really applying what we've learned over the last 15 years and trying to understand the roadblocks that are out there when it comes to innovation, when it comes to developing strategies, and when it comes to financing. And again, that goes depending on how we are in the cycle.
So I know that you recently did a survey called the Biodesign Outcomes Project, and you've also done focus groups. Can you give us some idea of some of the findings that you came up with in that survey? Are you going to jump down and
Sure. Should we talk a little bit about the curriculum changes first, and then talk about where the outcomes and where people go?
Yeah, I mean, sure.
Okay. We could do
Nod
it that
and
way.
smile,
It's just exactly.
No, I think as Josh indicated, and Todd and I would definitely agree that the fundamentals of kind of what we teach and the process, the core of the process really is the same. But one of our big challenges, and one of the things that we really work to do, is make sure that what we're teaching and how we're teaching it is adapting, right, to the environment around us. And so, Paul, I'll call it a preview instead of stealing our material. Hit on a couple of the really big things that are changing. But we did, recently we've done some focus groups with fellowship alumni, and like what do you wish you'd learned when you were here? That or what do you wish you had more of? And those kinds of things. And we adapt to that. So the value, the health economics is, one of the big things that is just really top of mind for everyone. And so learning, helping people understand how to look for value-rich opportunities, and then understand and estimate what that would look like. How great of an improvement or a reduction in cost would folks have to deliver with a new technology to get stakeholders interested in making a change? And that, so it's not just about constructing your downstream value proposition, but really thinking about those things very early and continuously through the process, so you have something that can really be successful in this very competitive, demanding marketplace, cost-sensitive marketplace.
So Todd, you went through the program, it sounds like 10 years ago or so?
Yeah, 12 years ago, and Josh was the fellowship director.
So how is the experience, how would the experience of someone today differ from the experience that you went through?
So two parts to that question. I think it is different. The teams are bigger. There was only 4 fellows now we have 12. So I think it's a bigger program. We have a graduate program that's much, much larger. So the culture here and the amount of drive and interest in biodesign innovation is a lot different than it was in the 4th year. I think that the interest in doing certain types of devices was very specific back then. Now people are really looking outside the box, really trying to change the way we do healthcare. And again, I think the value has been a big change for us. It's no longer just about being better. You have to be better and you have to be more cost effective. You have to drive more value. And so, and I think we're grinding that into everybody, whether they like it or not, which is, it's the message you may not hear all the time, but you're gonna hear it at the end of the line. You're gonna hear it when it comes to acquisition and hospital use and reimbursement. So you can kind of kid yourself that this is the coolest thing in the world, but if you can't find someone to pay for it in the new healthcare system, all that work for 10 years doesn't matter. And so we're really trying to drill that down. For myself, I would say that the transition from being a fellow to having the opportunity to be in the fellowship and work with the fellows every day, or every week, I should say, and interact with them, has been probably one of the most rewarding parts of my career. It really, I mean, for me it was, and Paul remembers this, he said, I really think you should do a fellowship. And the theme that hopefully comes along tonight is that mentorship is probably the single biggest aspect that can make an impact in your career. We say here at Stanford, intelligence is a commodity, right? But it's what you do with it. But it's also the people that help get you there and train you. And so the things that Josh and Paul and Tom and lots of other people, Jay Watkins, a lot of people that contribute, a lot of the people in this room that I've worked with, everything that you do, everything that you teach us, and teach the fellows, we learn and we apply those things. And so for me to be able to integrate that and be able to be part of that has been a big change in my career, because I would have never anticipated being in this spot if you asked me 10 years ago. So there was at the starting, and it was really about the technology that you worked at within the fellowship. So in other words, you were going to the hospital, looking for needs, and the question was, well, what have you done on the technology you started? Now it's just exploded from that, because people have had very good success in the technology that started, lots of companies formed, but on the other hand, a lot of them, and more importantly, have done even greater impactful things. They've left the fellowships. You could have had a fail, things didn't work out, they chose not to pursue, and they're doing all sorts of different things. So there's a lot of heterogeneity, a lot of different choices, but clearly it's broadly in med tech and healthcare.
So I noticed that from having seen the survey results, I'm certain if you put slides on this, that you asked them both what they liked most about the program, and you also asked them for a wish list, some of the things that they wish they had gotten insight into in the program. Can you share some of the things on what were the things that people thought was most helpful to them in the program, and also what were some of the things that were on their wish list?
I'll have to scratch my head a little bit on this one. A few things that stand out.
I actually have the sheet here.
It's fine.
So there's a test.
It'll take me a
Yeah,
second.
exactly. One of the things that people really enjoy is the multidisciplinary nature of the teams, right? And the fact that it, learning to work with clinicians and engineers and people and then interface with stakeholders across the ecosystem really does help prepare them to be successful, regardless, whether they're inside a big company or they're starting their own organization. So that was definitely something that stood out. In terms of what they wish, we've kind of touched on this a little bit. The environment out there is getting so much more difficult that a lot of the things that they put down on their wish list was geared toward preparing them for success out there, right? So it was, we need more help learning how to do technical de-risking, right? So that we have test results and things to convince investors that, we know what we're doing. Similarly, the environment for implementing these technologies, so finding funding, having a solid business plan, a good value proposition, and Tom and Uday will talk a little bit potentially more about this, but having them getting really beyond the idea, right, and the kind of the preliminary screening of the ideas, and really being better prepared to implement it in the difficult environment is on that list.
So it's interesting that you frame it that way, because one of the things that stood out to me in terms of the wish list was more about what was characterized as downstream commercialization.
That's
and
right.
I would say 15 years ago, the notion that if you build it, they will come was kind of was fairly well accepted in this community. But now for a lot of startups, it's about how to get to the market. And if you look at really innovative environments like Israel and Ireland, the one thing that they talk about there they need is marketing folks and commercialization folks. To what extent have those kinds of ideas become part of the curriculum now?
So I think Uday probably will touch on that a little bit, because I think that's something that we've tried to implement and we're going to be transitioning. So we've talked about the 2E, the second generation, the second edition, I should say, of the fellowship, which will start this next year. We've tried to learn from the things that we've done right and also the things that we've done wrong. We've tried to get direct feedback from the fellows, and I think overwhelmingly it is these commercialization issues, which is, I think, ultimately comes back to value, right? How do you understand how to be compelling when the healthcare system is changing all the time? And the healthcare system, not just the United States, but understanding the healthcare system in Europe and in Asia. So being able to understand how to build a true value proposition from value exploration up front. Thinking about the opportunities that are out there is a foundation. But then ultimately the question is, how do I get to market? How do I build a business? Not just how to develop a technology. So we're really kind of evolving into just, I have a cool widget and I want to convince somebody it's cool, to a value proposition of a company that can stand alone and build value for investors.
So before we end here, I want to just touch on 2 more points. One, in addition to the program and the coursework, Lyn, you've been instrumental in a book that has come out of this program, and I wonder if you could just talk to us a little bit about the book, what it's designed to do, and how it fits in the overall scheme of what biodesign is trying to do.
Yeah, the book, boy, have we had a lot of fun with the book, right? Yes. So actually it's fun because we have literally all been very involved in the book. And the book actually sort of stemmed from the class a little bit. And it was like, we need, nobody's written a book on how to do medtech innovation, and we've got a lot of ideas, but we need teaching materials. There was no book.
It was a handout. We sat down. It was a handout we were trying to construct when it first began.
Yeah. So we said, let's write a couple of 10 papers, 10 pages each. We'll just bang them out on the 10 most important topics. And as soon as we wrote those, it was like, hey, these are really handy, right? And let's do another 10. And then once we had the whole set, we said, let's really document this and shop it. And we were able to get some interest in writing the textbook. And again, we thought, well, we'll just do this kind of quick and dirty. And 700 pages later, we came with our submission. And the fun thing about it really, truly, is that the scope of what we can do here at Stanford is somewhat limited, in that we have a finite teaching team. The process we teach is very high touch, right? It depends on this mentorship, as Todd has said. And so writing the book at least gave us a way where we could kind of spread the biodesign innovation process to programs across the country as well as around the world. And so the first edition of the book, I think, it's a niche market, but we sold over 10,000 copies of the first edition of the book. And then we said, well, we need to update it and do a second edition. And so we said, let's update the 20% that's going to give us 80% of the impact. And that didn't work out so well. So we rewrote more than half of it with more case studies and more value orientation and better information on commercialization planning and things. And that too is, we feel like that's an important way for us to kind of give to the kind of community as a whole.
So that's going to tie into a theme that we're going to explore with Tom and Uday about how kind of the scope or the horizon of the program is changing to go forward. Let me end this session by asking you one question similar to the one because it's an area that interests me deeply, which is the connection with industry and particularly industry executives and venture capitalists. How, if at all, have those relationships or those mentoring programs changed over the course? It certainly seems to me that there's, again, greater awareness. Those relationships have deepened over time. Is the relationship and the role of industry, investors, and executives different today than it was? Has it evolved, or is it still pretty much fundamentally the same?
Everybody's looking at me. Great.
Yeah.
So, first of all, they're a critical part of the ecosystem, right? You need investors, you need the corporates, as not just to put the money in and help you everything else, but as we said, they're mentors. We have many executives and many of the venture people who come in and teach weekly, come in the graduate class and come in and meet with the fellows. I would say that most of the fellows would probably say at this stage they've had a chance to take a few of their ideas out in April and explore it. And it's usually the venture community that's talking and saying, hey, sure, I'll spend some time with you and give you some feedback. So I think they're not just critical to the ecosystem itself, but they're critical to what we're trying to teach. They're mentors. And so, their success and what they're building their career in their own technologies is also the commitment to the next generation of innovators.
Great. So before we get to Tom and Uday, Paul, I know that you have an announcement to make.
Yeah, I do. So tomorrow morning, there's a press release going out that's going to say that the program in biodesign will not be going forward. Instead, we are transitioning to the Byers Center for Biodesign with a generous gift from the Byers family. And this is a pretty pivotal transition for a couple of reasons. One is this comes out of the universities deciding about a year ago that they kind of liked what we were doing and thought that we should be around indefinitely. So that's what a center means, is that the Stanford is committing to having us here and continuing to train fellows and students for years and years. And it means a couple of other things. One is that it means the university is helping us commit to developing support for the fellowship program. And so our biggest, the Byers gift helps us get started, but our biggest fundraising goal in the next little bit is to raise endowed fellowships to support the fellows going forward. And I'm happy to say that our first endowed fellowship has been supplied by two people in the audience. So Chris Martin and Paul Grand are here. Why don't you guys stand up and acknowledge yourselves. And I think you're seeing on the screen the new logo. The only nuisance about that is that today's the last day I'm going to wear my Biodesign socks with the old logo on them. So, that's the way it goes. Yeah. Thanks.
Great. Well, I think that's a great way to tee up what's coming in the future. So Tom and Uday, let me turn to you. As we begin to talk about the future, I want to start with an area that I think bridges both present and the future. We see Chris Shen in the audience over here, and that is what might be called the globalization of biodesign. I know that there are now biodesign programs in places like China, India, Singapore, and there are also programs outside the US that have modeled themselves after biodesign, like Ireland's Bioinnovate program. Can you talk a bit about what those foreign programs, what those overseas programs, how they came about, what they mean to the program, how they build on, and if at all change the mission of what Biodesign program's trying to do here?
Thanks. I'll use this as a segue to another piece of what we were doing. So I was fortunate to be a fellow 10 years ago myself, and just like Todd, really learned a lot from the program and wanted to give back. So around about 10 years ago, we also realized that Stanford was interested in exploring global opportunities. So we started a global fellowship with universities in India and then more recently in Singapore, which I've been able to lead and teach fellows. So a lot of what we've learned about, you've been hearing a lot about value. A lot of other countries have been thinking about value by default because they've had to. It wasn't a choice, it wasn't a luxury to spend 16 or 18% of GDP on healthcare. They didn't have that opportunity. So in the last 8 years, as we've learned a lot about other countries and other economies, that learning has translated to a lot of what we've done and what we've incorporated. So in terms of your question, David, I think the global network is just as much as what we can teach them, but what we can learn back from other countries. Mm-hmm. And this larger network has really helped shape kind of what we want to go forward with. I think one thing I want to show on the slide, if the vision's up here. So as Paul said, as we move to becoming a center that's going to be on the Stanford campus indefinitely, we need to have a vision. We need to think about where do we want to go. So a lot of us sat down and thought about, like, what have we learned over the last 15 years? It's not just about the people, it's about what the people end up doing in whatever capacity they do. And we realized, like, we really wanted to bring it back to the patients who we serve, because ultimately a lot of what we do, no matter how you touch folks when you're dealing with a medical or health technology, is that it helps somebody. So we spent a lot of time thinking about it, and we realized that could we narrow it down to a vision statement, which I think you see on the screen right now, to be a global leader in advancing health technology innovation to improve lives everywhere. A very simple statement, but I think it captures the essence of we've been abroad, we've learned a lot, we've been able to teach a lot, but most importantly, we hope this network of people we've taught can help improve lives everywhere. So that was a great framework of thinking about what we want to be for the next 10, 15, 20 years, and hopefully for forever. But what are we going to do in the next 5 or 10 years? So one of the things we thought about is for the last 15 years, our mission has really been to empower and educate innovators. So we really focused a lot, as you've heard about, on fellows and what they can do. But I think we realize that our mandate now is kind of in a leading position of what we've been doing with our book and everything else we've done, and this global network has to be broader than that. It can't be just about teaching innovators, because I think we have a responsibility to use based on where we are and what we've done and all the people we've trained. So we spent a lot of time, again, gathering a lot of feedback from fellows and faculties and others in the community, think about what else would we do. And so now hopefully you see the mission statement. So this mission statement is going to be our guiding beacon of what we will be focusing on for the next few years, and a lot of what the money that will be raised and what we'll be teaching the fellows will support. So just like before, the first thing is educating, but now empowering. Part of the empowering is that using the network to allow these fellows who have this education to take it to the next level. The other thing that we realized is that the definition of medtech has changed. So when I was a fellow, as you've heard, stents, implants, pacemakers, I'm a cardiologist by training, these are all the things people focused on. But these days, the toolbox of technology we have with which to solve a need has changed. We have data from my own experience, wearables, a lot of different things. So I think we realized that also, as cost has to be taken out of the system, how do we move to lower places of care, which means out of the hospital, ambulatory settings, which also means moving from acute episodes of sickness to prevention. So we realize also that we're not just medical technologies anymore, we're not just medical devices, we're really health technologies in the broadest sense, from early prevention to late stage disease. So that's why you see in our mission statement also health technology innovators. And finally, what's probably the biggest change in what we're doing is we actually are accepting the position of wanting to be a leader in this space, but a leader really thinking about how the whole healthcare system in the US really transitioned to a value-driven one. And a value-driven one, at least in the area that we know best, which is innovation. So these two pieces of our mission, continue to educate and empower, but now also taking a leadership role in which we can promote value, promote things in research and publication that may influence policy, have a global network of people in which we can send our fellows to enhance their education, as also to enhance and work with other programs. This is something we'll be building out over the next few years. That's a very, I think, more keeping with what Stanford is known for, but also something that builds on the 15-year foundation that you've heard about to date.
So you frame the globalization in a very large context. Let me bring it down to one more specific question, which is how translatable are the principles that you're teaching here in the U.S. to other geographies? Does the Biodesign program in India or Singapore have the same curriculum? Does it look very similar? Or because of the nature of the markets there and the health systems there, is it a very different type of program?
So our fellowship, as you've heard, the process is very universal. But I think one of the things we realized early on is that we don't have the knowledge that people who have grown up and are from a certain culture have. So one of the reasons we did the India program, in which we have a national search in India to bring 4 fellows here, and then in Singapore, is that we want to train in-country innovators, because for us to go and parachute in and understand all of the cultural and societal norms, how healthcare is delivered, and having not lived it is very different than if you actually have experienced it. So what we do is bring fellows here for 6 months to actually do the exact same program, but in a condensed way. So all the things that Todd teaches, we teach the exact same way to the global fellows. But all of that is a kind of a dry run, if you will, for when they go back. Because our goal then is for them to use what they've learned to solve problems of the developing world in India, in Singapore, and then larger in Southeast Asia. Because again, the principles are the same, but the context is very different and such. And so having fellows from those countries, they understand the context and thus can come up with the correct constraints for which to solve a problem. So universal, but applied.
So Tom, let me bring you in here, because we keep talking about how the medtech industry has changed and some of the pressures, and it's actually been kind of cyclical, easy to raise money, sometimes difficult, going up regulation. But from a physician's point of view, And the physician component to biodesign has always been critical. This isn't just about a bunch of engineers coming and figuring out, but the physician. Talk to us about how the healthcare system has changed, and from a physician's perspective, how the program has to adapt to some of the pressures, some of the issues that the provider side is confronting today.
Yeah, so first of all, I'd make the observation that I think biodesign and its principles makes for better doctors, because it makes you a better problem solver, because instead of jumping to a conclusion, it makes you try to understand the problem. And so the reason I've encouraged our trainees to participate is I honestly think it makes you a better doctor. Mm-hmm. And in the end, this is about taking care of patients, and for us, I think it's about the impact of how broad a scope can you treat. If you are one doctor doing one thing, you get one RVU. But if you train a next generation to innovate, we think the scope and scale, as Lyn said earlier, can be profound. I think the other thing that's gotten more interesting as tools and technology have changed is the nature of our partnerships. Who could imagine that Intel would have a CMO? Who could imagine that today Mark Zuckerberg announces that he wants to cure all human disease within the century? Think of that. That was today, and check it out, Google it tonight, and that announcement has been made. And where else would we want to be but in the Valley, and in particular at Stanford? I want to come back to a comment Paul made. I think at the average university, this would have been snuffed out in a heartbeat. But the fact that we had John Hennessy as a president, who happened to mentor two grad students, Larry and Sergey, and be on the board of directors at Google, John talks about the porous walls of this university. And I think our ability to be inside, to be outside, to have so many of you who are working in the real world here as our colleagues, our friends, and as our coaches and teachers and mentors is incredibly powerful. And so I think there really is a new group of partners, whether it's Google, Apple, Facebook, Facebook, the Oculus program, VR for training, for ways of assessing performance. Lots more to come on that.
So you raised a topic that I want to talk a little about, which is that the technology horizons have to change over the course of the last 15 years. We simply have new capabilities and new technicians. Digital is an obvious area, something like neuromodulation is another area. Where do you see the technology horizons going? And does the program change fundamentally when you're talking about bringing to the fore digitally based or sensor based technology than maybe a traditional catheter based or implant based technology? How are you preparing the biodesign program for a world in which Google and Johnson & Johnson are now collaborating on a robotic system?
Yeah, one of the most compelling covers on The Economist magazine less than a year ago showed the globe with all of the countries made up of cell phones. And the observation was made that by the year 2020, 80% of the world's adult population will have a supercomputer in their pocket. Mm-hmm. That makes you think very differently about how do we think about distributed health. The patient is no longer someone that is in the hospital, but the ability to connect and be connected at any point in the globe becomes profound. It really changes the definitional piece. I will come back and say that I think the problem solving, the understanding the problem and the need doesn't change, but the toolbox that we use to get there is now much more powerful. Mm-hmm.
I was intrigued in the data that Todd put forward, and I think it might have been on Lyn's slide as well, that at least some portion, a significant portion, almost a third of the fellows go back into clinical practice. And I wonder, for med tech companies, I would argue on some level that they've always benefited from physicians who are somewhat unconscious or unconcerned about the cost of technology. And I wonder what a grounding in something like health economics, which we've heard over and over again, is now a big issue, a big part of the curriculum here, what that does to the clinician going back into private practice to have gone through an innovation program that stresses needs identification, the economics. I know value and economics are big in the way you think about what the program's all about.
Yeah, I mean, if you talk to two guys that I give huge credit to as personal mentors, Tom Fogarty and Rodney Perkins, both of them have said, A, it makes them better doctors, B, they understand the problems, C, they're not an administrator or a C-suite person, but rather you are a colleague who can go talk to a urologist or a cardiologist on an even footing.
That was the definition of
very
Freudian
Freudian.
slip.
Yeah. But no, on an even footing, so that you can really come to understand what the problem is. Otherwise, you know, once you're out of the clinical world for 5 years, the world has changed by at least 50%. So my urge to the docs is that this doesn't necessarily mean you have to give up the practice of medicine.
So let me kind of take off, because I think that's a very interesting perspective, and throw it open to everybody on the program today, and ask whether a consciousness or an awareness of the health economics changes fundamentally the technology that comes out of an innovation program, or whether it is simply a screen, whether it's simply a kind of a coloring of the way you approach traditional technology. When we talk about health economics and about the need to be cost conscious, does that shift our perspective to new technology horizons? Does it just say that when we develop something new, we're going to have to take economics into consideration? Because it's one thing to say the system needs a whole new set of tools. It's another thing to say if you're going to bring that tool forward, it has to have a cost-benefit analysis. Uday, it looks like you want to weigh in first on this.
Yeah, I would just say that I think, I don't think it's actually changed. I think it's just become more of a focus. So, like you mentioned, 10 years ago, people would say, do you have a good need? Do you have a good solution? That's it. Now it's like, do you have a good need? Do you have a good solution? Do you understand your regulatory pathway? Do you know how you're going to get paid? There's a lot more questions that that not by intention, people have been asking. And so now we're realizing that if you really want to do this right, you need to codify these questions at the time you're looking for your need. Because by the time you've looked at your need and got to your solution, and then if you start asking those questions, you're already far down the road, and then you're trying to rationalize how to figure out why your thing is actually cost effective when it may not be. So I think, and many of the investors around the valley ask this routinely, before you even know how you're solving a problem, like, tell me how this is going to actually improve clinical and economic outcomes as well. So I think it doesn't have to really do with the technology, and I think we do get enamored quite a bit with all of the technology that's out there. But again, we're fundamentally a program that says technology is good, it's just more things with which we can solve problems with, but that's not what should drive the problem solving. The problem should be the problem, and depending on the patient. So we have cell phones, but if you can't see it, if you're 85 years old and need glasses to read, it doesn't really matter. So I think it's really making sure that we still understand the problem, and just understand we have a bigger toolbox. So because that's today. In 10 years, who knows what new technology is out there. So I don't think we'll be chasing technologies. I think fundamentally our process will stay the same.
Does anybody else have any thoughts about it?
I'll just say that I think that what's changed is that the cost has become part of the need. You know, before cost really wasn't, sort of we wouldn't think about that. We'd look at the clinical problem, the physiology, et cetera. But now we realize that cost is limiting the ability for technology actually touch people's lives because it's too expensive, or they can't get coverage for it, or what have you. And so the ability to now factor it in and say, well, it's got to cost less than this, because that's what's actually going to be able to get out to people is a real big difference.
Anybody else have a thought on that? Okay, I'm going to go a minute over, and because I'm going to ask everybody to think about, at the 15-year anniversary, what the legacy has been of this program. I mean, as I just reiterate, as I go around, I just feel the influence of the biodesign program enormously in a lot of different geographies, not just here in Palo Alto, but elsewhere in the US and overseas. And Paul, I'm just going to begin with you, and Josh as well. What do you think the legacy has been, and how close to your original vision is that legacy?
So I'll take a piece of the answer and say I think both the process and the way we're approaching training in the process is the legacy, and it makes me want to highlight one point, which is the fact that we get such enormous help from the community, and in fact, if you allow me, I just want to take a minute and ask, so let's do this. If you're a faculty person or a staff person in biodesign, I'm going to ask you to stand up. If you've mentored someone, if you're in industry, if you've mentored one of the fellows or students, if you've helped us with a grant program, if you've talked to a biodesign related company. So let's, in the audience, if you're an alum and you're helping the program. So those people that I just mentioned, would you please stand up? Okay, so this is what I mean. When we go to reception, you all get drinks first, okay? So, Josh?
Oh, wow. You know, I was struck by the event last week where the images of the faces of the fellows and everyone who's gone through sort of scrolled by this 80-foot long screen, recognizing that that's the fellows, but in fact there's, you know, hundreds of students that we've had a chance to, you know, touch their lives, and I think that that's really the legacy of the program. And what's great is that the fellows, the alumni, you know, students who have been here to see the technologies they're creating, and also their own commitment to training and mentorship of the sort of next generation is really gratifying. So I think we've really accomplished our goals and many fold over really through their accomplishments.
As we go down, Tom, maybe come back this way.
Yeah, I think the biggest legacy of any great university are the graduates and their contributions to the world for the rest of their lives. And I think we've been able to move the needle on those that have come to work with us. I think we've taken some silver medalists and turned them into gold medalists. And the fact that for the rest of their lives they will make contributions, that to me is the gift that keeps on giving, and why I get up every morning to be a role player in this.
Yeah, so I would say I think it's that Stanford Biodesign has become kind of the standard in how to think about biomedical innovation. And because of that, it's had what you've heard here, a multiplier effect, not just from fellows teaching students, students teaching, you know, as they graduate others, but also now programs teaching programs teaching their own fellows teaching students. And that's kind of, if you were able to plot this on a map, it would, you know, look viral. And I think that's not easy to accomplish and rare and very special.
Great. Todd and Lyn, you're going to get the final words here.
Go ahead.
So I fundamentally agree. It's all about the people, and that is really, I mean, why I personally am so excited to be a part of Stanford Biodesign. But the other thing that just is a funny little thing, you know, we go to different places around the world and conferences with other universities and things, and it's so fun when somebody will be like, you know, I'm using your videos in my class. I'm really embarrassed, but they're too good not to use. You know, so it's just the little things that, you know, show that the work that we're doing is being adopted and used by, you know, and helping people, help more people and create more trainees around the world. That's exciting.
Todd, you've gone through the program and now you're shaping the curriculum.
So, I mean, the brand is the people. I mean, I think that if you look at the people, 168 fellows, 1,000 graduate students, the reason that the brand is getting a recognition internationally and else is the people, because it's hard to go someplace in this fairly small med tech community and not bump into biodesign, into the brand. And so I think it reflects on the people when people are looking for jobs. I mean, the alumni now are completely organized and structured. They have events, they help each other, they bring in speakers. I mean, the thing has just exploded. So I think, you know, the brand itself reflects the people that have come from the program.
Great. Well, not only for the time they've spent for the last hour, but what they've done for the last 15 years or so. Let's give a round of applause to everybody on the program.